This interview is being conducted for Inverkeithing People Making History Oral History Project. My name is Dr Sue Morrison and the respondent is Nancy Rhouma. Is that how I pronounce it, Nancy?
That's as good as it'll get, yeah.
This is the 7th of December 2021 and the interview is taking place in Inverkeithing Civic Centre. Thank you very much for agreeing to be interviewed for this project, Nancy. Much appreciated.
It's a pleasure.
For the record, would you please confirm your name?
It's Nancy Rhouma, born as Agnes, but known as Nancy.
And how old are you?
I'm 70 years old.
Thank you very much. Where were you born, Nancy?
I was born in Dunfermline Maternity Hospital, but we lived in Inverkeithing all our lives.
Thank you very much. You've never moved out of Inverkeithing?
No, just to meet my husband and get married.
I've already met Dowd, but could you tell me a bit about him?
Dowd, yes. Well, it was a holiday romance many years ago, 45 years. We've been married, but we met 5 years before that, courted for 5 years until he was able to come over here after his national service and things. And we got married in Tunisia to make it easier. And when he came over here, we had a blessing in the house from the local minister for the family.
That's lovely, thank you very much. Before Dowd, could you tell me a wee bit about your birth family?
Yes, the Dixons and the Clarks. My mother's side were the Clarks, my father's side the Dixons, with a CKS, and they were all Inverkeithing. My father's father and his family, they worked on farms between here and Kirkcaldy. My father's father, my grandfather, worked with Clydesdale horses on these farms, and then they moved to Inverkeithing and he got a job in the paper mill. But he hadn't long started there when he was knocked off a wagon with a crane hook and hit his head on the rails and died instantly. So my father's mother was left a widow with 5 children, so it was pretty tough for them. But she took in washing and different things, ironing, and they managed.
What was your grandfather's name?
David Dixon.
How old would he have been, do you know?
Well, my father was just a young boy, a very young boy. So that would be the early 30s maybe when he was killed. So he was still a young man.
Thank you. Where did you live when you were growing up?
We've always lived below the high street. We've never lived above the high street. I was born in a one-roomed cottage at the bottom of Alma Street in Inverkeithing, in the dip between Alma Street and King Street. And I can remember the cottage and the one room. It had mum and dad's bed recess, a wee cooker and sink and a coal fire and my cot. And I remember it quite clearly. It was next to the Keithing Burn, where we played every day while I was growing up, or fished or whatever. And there was a large tenement block next to us where my mother's friend and her family lived, and they were lifelong friends after that, the pair of them. And we moved to Fraser Avenue when it was first built in the 50s, and my mother thought it was a palace because it had a bathroom. We only had an outside toilet at the cottage, had a bathroom and coal-fired central heating and a kitchen. It was a palace, yeah, for people then. And it was a wonderful place to grow up. You know, we had a lot of freedom in the 50s. We would wander everywhere and be away all day and no one would look for you. And you were always in a gang. There was always a group of you, never on your own. And I remember my mother and the neighbours coming out into the streets and cawing the skipping ropes for us and things. And we'd have concerts in the close, and dress up and do our acts, and it was lovely. It was a wonderful place. And from there we moved to Hamilton Terrace, right next to the Burn again, when I was about 10, I think. And that's where I met my friend Anne, and we've been lifelong friends since, so that's about 60 years now. And it was lovely. It was the same thing. There were 10 houses in the row, and it was always open doors, and all the neighbours, helped each other, and we'd have big parties and New Year parties where everyone had to do their act, including us. And we'd have football matches between the old ones and the young ones, and yeah, it was great. From there I got married when we lived there to Dad, and we lived with an aunt and uncle in Spitalfield for a wee while. Then we got a flat in Fraser Avenue, and from there we moved to Spitalfield when my son was a year old, and we bought the wee flat when we were allowed to do so for £6,000, I think, at the time. And sold it 8 years later or so, and bought the house we're in now in Preston Crescent, still near the water.
You were born not far into the post-war period.
Yes.
Were there any remnants of war round about?
I think I was born at the end of rationing, wasn't I, probably?
Towards the end.
Yeah. There wasn't anything that I remember about the war, apart from my mother's brothers telling me stories about things. One told me a story that he was patrolling at the dockyard or the Forth Bridge, but they didn't have enough money for real rifles, so they painted wooden rifles silver or something so that they glinted in the sun. But whether that was true or not, I don't know.
He wasn't in the forces at that time, was he?
At that time, well, they were all in the forces during the war, but so they might have been, yeah. So I'm not sure.
Do you remember any sea defences down by the water's edge?
Well, when we were all young, we used to go along to what we called Seal Point, which is part of Dalgety Bay now. We'd just either walk round the coast or go through the fields, and it was an outcrop at Donnybristle House in Dalgety Bay, which was a navy establishment at the time. And we'd go there, and there were the old defence structures still there, probably, although it's a few years since I've been. There are little bunkers dotted about Inverkeithing, one on what we call Diggers Hill at the bottom of Fraser Avenue, and one just on Millbrae, the Millbrae path there, just along the way. So yes, I was aware of, there had been a war, and there were remnants of it dotted about.
Were there any air raid shelters?
Well, in my mother moved to Spitalfield in the 80s, and in the back garden there was an old Anderson shelter. There still was one underground further round Spitalfield, but my mother's had been brought up and was being used as a shed above ground, and it's still there. The house is sold now, but the Anderson shelter's still standing in the garden because I had it refurbished.
Thank you very much, that was interesting. What kind of games did you used to play with your friends when you were little?
Oh gosh. It was quite strange because there seemed to be seasons for things, and without anybody saying, we would all be out with our marbles, or peavers, which was hopscotch, with our cherry blossom polish tins filled with dirt as the weights for the or skipping. or on our scooters. I was lucky enough to have one. Roller skates. It just seemed to go in seasons. And where my father worked, he was a place called the Modo in Inverkeithing, and they made all these plastic toys. So we had a house full of paddling pools and the sort of Yogi Bear things with weights that you punched and things, and we had everything. And he drove a double-decker bus because he took people back and forward to work, and he would park it in front of the house in Fraser Avenue. There wasn't a lot of traffic then. And that was another playground for us. We would play on that bus all night, ringing the bell and pretending, and no one ever complained. It was great. It was wonderful times. My mother would lower water in a bucket out of the bathroom window to fill the paddling pools and things from the flats, and it was great. Yeah.
You're right on the water side here in Inverkeithing.
Mm-hmm.
How prominent was that in your youth?
Oh, tremendous, yeah. Even at primary school, on the way home from school, we'd nip down the burn for a wee bit of pottering about or fishing, and my mother always knew we'd been. She'd say that someone had seen me, but she could obviously smell the burn of me and my brothers, so we were always down the burn, or always round the beach at St David's. When I was in my teens, we'd build a fire on the beach and go in for a swim in the cold water and roast potatoes in the fire when we came out and things. They weren't very edible, but it was good fun. Yeah.
Which schools did you go to?
I went to Inverkeithing, which was a primary and secondary school, not just a primary, it was a secondary school too. The old school that's just off the high street. That was quite fun actually, but it was varied. I remember I once got the belt because I stumbled over a word when I was reading. Yeah, that wasn't good. I don't think I was more than 10 at the time, 9 or 10. Miss Moyes, I can still remember her with her floral apron. She used to take you out to the desk and you had to stand really close to her to read the book, and you were absolutely terrified. But I stumbled over a word and she took me out and gave me the belt. Just once, but... So yeah, there are some good and bad memories. But apart from that, it was good. Yes.
What did you get up to when you got a bit older? That you can tell me.
I was actually a really good girl. Didn't get into any trouble or anything, you know. I was pretty quiet, really. It was the 60s when I hit my teens. When I was 13, my aunt took me to the local shop and bought me the top 10 singles and a record player, which was wonderful. The Beatles were just there. They had about 3 or 4 in the charts at the time. So yeah, we used to... I remember going to the Palace at Rosyth and seeing their films there, Help and what have you, A Hard Day's Night or whatever it was. We actually had a cinema in Inverkeithing, down where the old Fleming's Warehouse is now, the Majestic. And I think my mother took me there when I was 4 to see Lady and the Tramp, and I remember that quite clearly. But yeah, my teens were when really teenagers were becoming a thing, you know, through the late 50s and 60s. And you were sort of an identifiable part of society, teenagers, for good or bad at the time. But it was great being a teenager in the 60s with pop music and the groups coming out and, you know, the Rolling Stones and what have you. It was, I feel it was we were quite blessed actually at the start of that, you know, and growing up in the 50s. So yeah, we did all the usual things. We went to clubs, for dancing, and there was a folk club in Dunfermline, the Kinema Folk Club, where I saw Billy Connolly when he was just starting out as a comedian musician, which was amazing at the time. He was amazing. So yeah, I worked in the Borough Engineer's office with Dunfermline Town Council at the time, and the engineers were always up to practical jokes and things, and we had after work parties and nipped to the pub on a Friday night, and yeah, did all the usual things.
Did you have any connection to wards?
Apart from my husband working there in his early days there, well, I actually went with him for his interview there, because
Tell me about that.
He didn't speak English at the time. He'd just come to this country with me, and he spoke Arabic, French, some German, a wee bit of Dutch, but he didn't speak English, so we were actually married in French. But I went with him for his interview, and John Ogg was the manager. And John said he was a bit concerned because Dave didn't speak English, and because of the health and safety, and if there was an emergency, you know, it might cause a problem. And I said, well, he's not stupid. And John said, well, I know that. And then he said, well, what's your maiden name? So I said, Dixon. And he said, who was your dad? I said, Davy Dixon. Oh, I played football with your dad when we were all young. You can start on Monday and we'll see how it goes. So that was that. And he was fluent in English within 3 months, so it was fine. But when our son was born, I'd given up my full-time work. And when Dad came out of wards, I went in and cleaned, just for some extra money, which wasn't the best job I've ever had, I have to say.
What did that involve? I mean, wards must have been a filthy place.
It was filthy, yeah. The men, when they came off the ships and out of the yard, they were, I mean, Dad would come in and just drop his clothes at the door so that I could put them straight in the washing machine. So, yeah, it was a thankless task, but we had to do all the toilets. It was me and another lady, a lady that I'd gone through school with, Sandra. And, but, you know, you didn't think about it, you just did it. It was handy at the time. You did whatever was fitted in, really.
So you've stayed in Inverkeithing all your life. What kind of changes have you seen?
Lots. When I was a child in Inverkeithing, it was a really strong community. You had everything here you needed. You know, shoe shops, more than one, draper shops, at least 3 that I can remember. Actually, probably 4. Grocer shops, newsagents, tobacconists, everything. The co-op horse and cart, and the milkman bringing the milk round. Yeah, you didn't have to go anywhere. Everything was here, greengrocers. And the high street was lovely. You know, we had the Lammas Fair every year, but every year we'd have this mile of pennies. They would draw a white line along the high street from the the primary school to the corner of the post office, and all the classes would march out and lay down their penny on this line. I have no idea where the money went. I'm assuming it went to some kind of charity. But it was just part of the community, things you did. The Highland Games at the time were down in the old Games Park, just outside Inverkeithing as you go towards Crossgates. It's now a secure dog walking or running place now. But we all used to march down there from the primary school, the school to in the gala. We'd march down there every year, and it was lovely. We used to have lovely old artefacts. We had a beautiful cobbled square. We had a drinking fountain in the well that I remember, a horse's trough that used to be in the high street. But the old town council took all those away. Don't know what they did with them. And then in the 70s we were regionalised, and we lost our town council to Glenrothes, and we became part of Dunfermline District Council, I think, at the time. So it changed quite a bit then, because I mean, the community was still there through the 60s and 70s, but towards the late 70s, 80s, then it became more detached from being in control, I suppose, had something to do with that. You know, authority was detached away from us, whereas before you would just come up to the local office and make your complaint or whatever. But roads and parks and everything moved away, so there was a change. The Friary Gardens weren't kept the way they always had been, and things like that I remember. So yeah, parks got run down. But there is still a strong community here even now. You know, that core community is still there. And with all the new houses being built and new families moving in, I think they're just as, many of them are just as interested in building that community again and having it there. So, but there were changes, definitely regionalisation in the 70s. Wasn't a good thing, I don't think.
What changes would you like to see introduced now?
Well, I'm part of Inverkeithing Trust, which is a charity we set up last year, and our strapline is joining the dots, and that's what we're trying to do. We just want to build a strong, vibrant community again, and keep people informed about what's going on in the town, take on projects that we can maybe do to help that. We've started a pantry. Well, actually, that's not fair. Fife Council began the pantry and brought the trust in to help, and we took it over from the council last June, and I've kept it going through COVID, so that's been great. We started a garden, the old garden competition again this year, and we'll build on that next year. And there are other projects we're interested in, a community choir and things like that, to help bring that sense of belonging again and bring everyone into a new community.
If money and resources were not an issue, what would you like to see happen to Inverkeithing itself?
Well, I would like to see the old primary school site taken back into the community, as it's right on the edge of the conservation area. It's a really important site. It still has the old 19th century school in it. The later school, I don't know, 1913 or something, was burned down, more or less. The outside walls are still there. But I'd like to see something done there that was for the community. It could be a marvellous space, you know, with a green space for the town, a vibrant green space with other things going on in it, artist studios in the old school and things like that. We were involved in a potential project for it with another charity, but I'm afraid it hasn't come to anything as yet, but I haven't given up hope. Not yet. But if money wasn't an issue, then I don't think there's a lot I'd like to see buildings wise. I think we need a youth space, definitely, that's dedicated for young people, that they can run, you know, with help and support, but they would be responsible for. It's sadly lacking in the town. We have a community wing at the high school, but a lot of young people don't like to go there because it's too near school, you know. They need something else to spread their wings. When I was young, we had umpteen cafes we could go into and sit all night with a glass of Coke and just play the jukebox. But they're not allowed to do that now, you know. So they definitely need somewhere to just sit and socialise and be young people, be teenagers, for good or bad. So I'd like to see that. That's important.
I'm afraid that time is beating us, but I would like to ask you, what is your favourite memory of Inverkeithing?
Oh gosh, it's not quite a memory. It's more a feeling. It's that feeling of belonging and knowing. I'm getting quite emotional now because it was strong, but it's about that feeling that you knew there were people there to support you if you needed it, or you were loved, and that ran through the whole town, and I think it just gives children such a strong foundation and builds resilience, helps them cope with whatever adult life might bring. I don't know why I'm getting emotional, but I think it's because I feel really strongly about the town, and because I experienced what I did, and to bring that back now when lives are so different, mothers work and there's not a lot of time, and activities are different. Children were left to get on with their own activities rather than being ferried about to different activities if their parents can afford it. So I think young people now miss out on quite a lot because they're not allowed to be children properly, and to meet risks and know how to deal with them and understand them, because parents are fearful, and I can understand that, but in reality not a lot has changed since the time I was growing up. The risks are still the same. So I would like children now to experience more of that rather than be so aware of the problems in life and the issues in life and what goes on in the world, because they can't help but know about it, whereas we were completely oblivious to it through our childhood, and I think that was quite a good thing in a way.
Nancy, thank you very much. That was lovely.
Oh dear, I don't know if it was. There's a lot more I could have said, but
next time.
Next time.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.